Welcome to the monthly virtual Infertility Workshop. I'm so glad you're here. If you're new, hey, I'm Kristin or Kiki, and I'm an infertility coach. I help women reduce the stress, anxiety, and fear associated with IVF so they can go through the process hopeful, supported, and with no regrets. Each month, I invite an infertility expert to dive deep into one area related to infertility. They share about the medical side, and I share about the emotional side. Sign up at this link to be notified about future infertility workshops so that you can join us live, and you can also get the replay sent directly to your inbox.
I'm so excited to pass the baton over to Dr. Natalie Crawford, who's joining us this month. She's going to talk about age and fertility. I'm guessing most of you know her and have heard of her. She's pretty active on Instagram and YouTube. She opened up her own fertility boutique in Austin, Texas, just this summer during COVID. That's what we were just talking about, called Flora Fertility. And she also has her own podcast called As a Woman Podcast. So Dr. Crawford, thank you for coming here. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to hear what you have to share with us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I love being able just to connect with people and talk about all of this fertility education stuff that I am so interested in and so fascinated in making sure that every woman understands it. The one thing that I always think is so important that I'm always surprised by, is that the difference in your egg number and your egg quality. So the way I like to describe it is if you imagine you have a vault inside your ovary. So if this is your ovary, here's your vault. So when you're born, the vault is full. And when you go through menopause, the vault is empty. So this is your reproductive lifespan. And it is different for every single woman. You're born with a different starting number of eggs, and the rate of decline is different. Now, what we can measure is not truly what's in the vault. I like to think of it as a steel-walled vault. So I can't really see in there and say, oh, I have this many eggs and this much time left. But we want as much data as we can, and we're always trying to answer that question. So the test people talk about if you go get a fertility evaluation is talking about an AMH blood test and an antral follicle count. And what these tests are, we're trying to evaluate the eggs in the vault by using surrogate markers. So in a normal month, what happens is the vault releases an entire group of eggs, and each egg grows inside a follicle. The brain will send out follicle stimulating hormone, so a well-named hormone, which stimulates one follicle to grow. As that follicle grows, the rest of them will die off, and that one follicle will ovulate. And then the whole process happens over and over again. So we are actually losing lots of eggs every month, not just the one that we're ovulating. And importantly, for us to evaluate them, the size of the group of the eggs that comes out of the vault is proportional to how many are left inside. So if you're really young, let's say you have a really full vault, you'll have around 20 or more eggs come out every month. And as you get closer to menopause, you'll have 1 or 2 eggs come out. And so even though we can't see inside the vault, we can evaluate these eggs outside the vault, and that's going to give us an idea of, are we high, average, low, critically low? And we like to think of it as a category and not a finite number, because human body's not perfect. So these things are going to fluctuate every month. So if I tell you that 20 is average, what does that mean? It could be 20, 22, 15, 23, 17, 14, you're going to have a month-to-month variability. So instead of holding tight to one number, we like to use these things in conjunction. So how many eggs are there and what your AMH is. So what those are is how many eggs there are. You can actually see the follicles on ultrasound, and that's called an antral follicle count, or an AFC. That number, you can't see the eggs because they're microscopic, but that little fluid-filled structure, or a cyst, tiny little cysts that are normal, so not abnormal cysts, you can count them, and that is going to help put you into that category. Similarly, every follicle that's there is going to make AMH. So the more follicles there are, you'll see them on ultrasound, there will also be a higher AMH level. And the fewer follicles that there are, you will see less of them, and there'll be a lower AMH level. So these two values are going to help us understand quantity. How many do we have? It's not telling us about the rate of decline. So just because you're good right now doesn't mean you'll be good in 2 years. We can't say that. It's like, imagine a graph and you've got one little data point. You don't know how fast or slow that number is dropping, but at least it's giving you an idea of where you are in the moment. Where this number becomes really important for us is that if we're going to do things like freeze your eggs or do IVF or any type of fertility treatments, you can only currently get the eggs that are outside the vault. So when we start thinking about fertility treatments like IVF, we would always rather do them in a woman when she has more eggs because there's a number game. There's strength in numbers instead of waiting until we have fewer eggs, because then it will be harder to achieve your goal. Each month, once those eggs are released, they're done. They're going to die or they're going to ovulate. If you're on birth control pills, what's happening is birth control pills are telling the brain to not send out any FSH. So all of those eggs come out in their follicles, and none of them see follicle stimulating hormone, and they all just die. You're not tapping into the vault any faster. You're not running out of eggs anymore if you're on birth control pills. Just like if you do an IVF cycle, you're not running out of eggs any faster, or if you freeze your eggs. We're just taking those eggs that are outside the vault, and instead of letting some of them grow, or instead of letting some of them die, we're saying, hey, let's get them all to grow for the sake of this treatment. And so that's something that is going to change how much time that you have. Really importantly, this whole idea of ovarian reserve, or how many eggs you have, does not impact natural fertility, because your body does not care. Do you have 30 eggs come out of the vault or 3? In a natural month, if you're ovulating, one of them will ovulate and the rest of them will die. So it's changing how many you can access if you're doing fertility treatments and how long you may have to try to get pregnant. But there's no change in natural fertility rates based on that AMH level or based on an antral follicle count. So it is also not a reason for infertility, although we do infertility treatments for women with low ovarian reserve all the time because we're trying to get them to pregnancy in a faster or a more efficient way. The other thing that's happening a long time there is, imagine all these eggs that are inside the vault. They are held, they're frozen in time. And this is where quality starts to play a role for us. So when we think about quality, I like to imagine you've got an egg, and actually your chromosomes are lined up in a stage of meiosis, which is cell division, called metaphase. And that's where they all meet in the middle. So as women, we're 46XX. So these little chromosomes line up 23X, 23X, and they stay here held apart by these little proteins called meiotic spindles. And when you ovulate, that's when they split. And that is when your genes are actually forming into that 23X, which is the egg that then can later be fertilized. So if you're 20 years old, they've been sitting here for 20 years. And if you're 40 years old, they've been sitting here for 40 years. And just like the proteins and the rest of our body, everything kind of breaks down. We look older as we get older. The proteins inside our eggs, they break down as well. And that is why we see an increase in genetic abnormalities or poor egg quality as we get older. And this is something that we really have to think of together. Because if you're waiting to start a family, are we going to be at a place where we have fewer eggs, and a higher proportion of those eggs are going to be genetically abnormal? And what does that mean for your treatments? And many women are really surprised when we start talking about, well, you're going to get this many eggs, but this many will be normal, and how that number starts to change, especially as women are over the age of 35. And so that's why, as fertility doctors and kind of as the general public, we always hear, oh, age 35, advanced maternal age. That's because around that age, you have about a 50-50 split of normal and abnormal. And after that, you start to see more abnormal eggs. That doesn't mean only abnormal, and it doesn't mean that older women can't get pregnant, because they can. But it can be harder, especially if you're waiting to start your family. And so that's where we start to pay a lot of attention into thinking about your age and how is it relating to both the quality of your eggs and the quantity. For the most part, you cannot change the rate of decline. I say for the most part. There is evidence that certain toxins can get into the vault. So a great example is cigarette smoke. So smoking is one of the things that we know that cigarette smoke can get into the vault and can drop your ovarian reserve. You'll go into menopause earlier the more that you smoke. Other things that can get into the vault are cancer treatments like chemotherapy, radiation, things that can get into the vault like endometriosis surgery. If you have an endometrioma or any type of cyst inside the ovary, that can get into the vault. And there's concern in lab studies that environmental toxins like BPA and phthalates and PFCs might be able to get into the vault also. And so you're seeing emerging push towards not drinking out of plastics and using clean products, because we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to protect the eggs that are in the vault. Even one thing I see all the time is I'll see a 42-year-old, I'm here in Austin, marathon runner, vegan, super duper healthy, who's shocked by her AMH. She's shocked that she has very low egg count. And she says, well, I'm so healthy, so this can't be the case. And the truth is, it most certainly can be the case. They are independent things. However, we also want to support the eggs and support these proteins by different things. So just like your whole body, I always say, there's things you can do in your own life that can break your proteins down faster. So you want to go drink tons of alcohol, be exposed to lots of toxins. That's also going to break your proteins down. There's things you can do that looks like they may support your proteins, like eating lots of fruits and vegetables and antioxidants, and maybe things like CoQ10. The theory here is that if we give proteins what they need, maybe that will help some of our egg quality, but it's not going to overcome age. And one of the top things we know as fertility doctors is that age is the number one determinant of success per cycle. And so understanding that, and I never want to be the bearer of bad news, but I will tell my patients really realistically, this is kind of where you stand for ovarian reserve. This is where you stand for egg quality. And what does this mean realistically? How many cycles may we need? How much time is this going to take? When do you start considering donor eggs, which is going to overcome both of these issues? And these are really hard, complex topics. I find it that my women who are a little bit older take it much better because we're a little bit aware that some of these things happen with age. It's the younger woman who has low ovarian reserve and is suddenly faced with this, oh my gosh, I don't have much time and I'm totally unprepared for it. That is much harder. And I know Dr. Likes and I both see women like this, and it's a harder place to take care of them. Therefore, I always say, if you want to get a fertility evaluation, I do this all the time. I can't tell you what your egg quality is until we test that egg in the lab. So we're going to use averages based on your age. We're going to encourage healthy habits. What's good for your body is good for your eggs. But we can evaluate your ovarian reserve. So if those numbers are good right now, does that mean you should consider egg freezing if you're waiting, to get pregnant because you have a higher return on that investment the more eggs that you have? Or do you say, okay, I feel a little comfortable waiting a little bit longer and I'm going to come back, in a couple more years? Those are really hard conversations. My biggest belief is that you as an individual woman or your friends or your family members need to be the women who are making these choices versus just letting time pass. So if you know you want to have a family, getting that information will empower you to make the choice that's right for you. And there's no right choice for anybody. Somebody may say, you know what? I'm okay using donor eggs. So even though my count is low, I'm not ready to become a mom yet, this doesn't make much sense to me. So I'm going to pursue donor eggs when I'm ready. And that's a lovely, wonderful option. Other women say, I really want to have my own genetic child. That's really what's important to me. And what does that mean? And what are my chances with that? Because once you get into the world and you're behind the game, it's a lot harder. So this is something that being proactive about and at least understanding where you stand and being the one to make a choice, that's a place where I love women to be.
All right. So Natalie, I completely agree. And I kind of say the same. I see some of my patients on here too, and they probably have heard that similar anecdotal evidence as well. I would also say that in terms of AMH, and you mentioned about it in younger reproductive age women, I usually say that a lower AMH in younger reproductive age women is not, the prognostic indicator of fertility is not dire, but as severe as older reproductive age women. And you mentioned the over 35, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, I hate the whole advanced maternal age moniker. I really do. But it is what it is.
Have to live it. Come on.
I know. It is what I'm way above 35, so it's okay now.
But, no, your chart though. Come on, that one hurts us.
But it is what it is in terms of the numbers you just said. So I like AMH, and I do use that as a marker and kind of a yardstick in terms of measurement of where I think we should go in terms of aggressiveness, as well as what you just said in terms of potential egg freezing. So I say the same, almost the same exact thing as you've said. It's funny.
I like that because we did not train at the same place. So
Not at all.
you always wonder, so what's considered a normal AMH? That really does depend. You know, the lab will give you the lab that you're sending the test to will give you a reference range, but we always think about what should be normal for your age. So what should be normal for a 38-year-old is not the same as what should be normal for a 24-year-old. And so the reference range is not going to break it down that way. That's why if you just get a blood test drawn by like a direct to consumer company where you drop your blood and you put it on paper and you send it off and they give you a range and they say normal, well, what does that really mean for you and your age? In general, the normal range for the test usually is like 1.5 to 4. But if you're in your 20s, we really should see it 2 or above. If it's lower than that, we start to wonder. Similarly, if you're 40, it's unlikely, although not impossible, that your AMH is going to be higher than 4. So I usually say for my 40-year-old women, you know, I love seeing values that are in the 1 range. So having it be interpreted for your age is really, really helpful. And that's why I harp on it till I die. The category is the most important: high, normal, low, critical. Okay. So if your doctor says, hey, this is low but not critical, okay, that means I'm still have a great chance of having a good outcome, but maybe I need to be a little bit more aggressive than I was thinking, depending on the size of my family. And that's the other thing that bears mentioning, is it depends on your goal. So my patients who are on here will hear me say it all the time, like, what is your goal? What is your goal? Because if your goal is baby 1, that's way different than if you want 3 kids because you're from a big family. And so thinking about the full picture, if you're 37 and you want 3 kids, it doesn't really matter to me if you can get pregnant right now or not, because your odds of getting pregnant with baby 2 and 3 are diminishing just based on the natural time. And so if that baby 3 is what you need to have your family complete, I am like bowing down to you because 2 run me ragged. But then we need to make choices now at 37 that increase our odds of having that goal happen before it's too late, because there are different decisions we can make at earlier time points that have a higher chance of getting you that full goal. You don't have to get rid of it, but it's really important to be honest and open. And what is a normal AMH or antral follicle count for your age? And what does that mean for you and what you want your family to look like? And have an honest discussion about that. Yes, and I think this is really important to have an honest talk with your doctor about your expectations. I tell all of my patients, I am looking for X number of, it's not going to be like, oh, I see it's going to be 8, but I'm saying, okay, based on this, we're looking to get, 6 to 10 eggs. And if we're in that range, we're achieving our goals based on your AMH and your antral follicle count. And for the most part, the lower your AMH is, the fewer you're going to get. And the higher your AMH is, the more you're going to get. For us nerdy ones over here, it's going to make a difference for what protocol we use and how much medication and what lead-in for suppression we choose. So we make a lot of choices based on these numbers. But I see women who really feel behind the game because they weren't educated through that process, and it's not their own fault. There's different doctors with different styles. But if you say, okay, my goal, we're expecting 6 eggs because I have a low AMH, and you know that going in, you're going to have your mindset for the experience a little bit different than if you're like, oh, my best friend got 24. Why am I getting 6? 24 may be completely a number you're never going to achieve. So we can't compare, just like we can't in life, we can't compare IVF cycles with our friends. We need to be asking our team, well, what are we looking for? What are we expecting? And what's our lower limit? And I tell every patient this, like a flat out number. Hey, for you, if I'm not seeing X number of eggs, we're not achieving our goal, and we should cancel the cycle and try a different protocol. And so if you have really low ovarian reserve, that number is going to be different than if you have really high reserve. But we want to make sure that you know what you're looking for so you can be empowered through your own IVF journey.
That I usually say 10 to 20 eggs is kind of an average yield. If your AMH is not showing that, because AMH has been shown to be a good prognostic indicator of how many eggs we could retrieve, like Dr. Crawford just said, I would say you're not at that level. The other thing is that your question is, and you alluded to, is how many children do you want, and could it take multiple cycles to get that number of embryos that you could use? That's another consideration as well.
The idealist world, I'd love to see you between 30 to 32, because we know we're going to get great egg quality and usually still at a great point before your egg reserve starts to drop. And that's the ideal world. Obviously, when you're over 37, I've frozen eggs and I have babies from women over 37, but it becomes, there's less of a return. You have to do more cycles to get to the same baby. And how many eggs do you really need to get? But 38-year-old 38-year-old eggs are still better than 43-year-old eggs. And if that's your life trajectory, like that's the reality of it. So you may say, hey, I'm only going to get 10 and I'm 38 and this may not equal a baby. I know that going into this, but it gives me a chance for a baby with a yet undetermined partner, or depending on your situation. And that's where you at least have the chance versus saying, I have nothing. But is it as much of a guarantee as 20 eggs from a 24-year-old? No, I mean, nothing's a guarantee, but we say, okay, that there's a numbers game here, and you should have somebody walking you through. If you fall on the average, how many eggs survive the freeze thaw? How many fertilize? How many make it to embryo? How many should be normal? How many will implant? And understand what that formula looks like, understanding that for any person, you're going to fall above or below those averages. So odds and averages are to help us guide decisions. They're not written in stone, but that should help you understand, okay, well, what does it mean if I only have a few eggs? It's still a chance, but you want to be the one making that decision, because we've all seen in the news where women come out and they say, nobody told me that I wasn't going to have a baby from these eggs frozen at age 39, and I only had 3 of them. And I think Dr. Likes and myself, we read that and we say, nobody counseled this person well. That's so sad, because they should have known that going into the process at that age of egg freezing. But younger is always better. You're going to have more eggs when you're younger, and you're going to have a better quality. So I always tell women, you should come in the moment you're asking me that question. So if you are asking me right now, should I come for egg freezing? Then the answer is, this is the right time, because you're never going to have more eggs. You're never going to have better quality eggs. So you might as well come in now and consider it. However, after 1 year getting pregnant at your age, you should be pregnant. So are there underlying factors that are playing a role here? And might you need to freeze eggs for yourself? What if your partner has very, very poor sperm counts and is going to have to do IVF? Well, then yeah, you definitely want eggs in the bank from yourself when you're younger and you have more. Or what if your tubes are blocked? So I think at a minimum, making sure that you have gotten your complete fertility evaluation done before you go through the process purely to give them to someone else. I've had women who've gone through a cycle and donated eggs, and then they've gone through another cycle and frozen them for themselves. And I think that's a great option too. But you don't want, is freezing your eggs going to hurt your own fertility? Absolutely not. You're just taking the eggs that are outside the vault and getting them to grow. So whether they go for you or to a donor, you're not going to hurt yourself. But I think the more concerning thing is that your age, if you've really been trying for a year, is that something else may be underlying that.
Is there a time limit on how long an egg can be frozen for?
No, they don't get freezer burn. Okay. So they're good. How the eggs are frozen is such a quick freeze process that it appears they can be frozen for an indefinite period of time. Now they haven't been, because the technology is still new. I think the longest an embryo has been frozen and made into a baby was like 24 years. And so this is still, I know, I see faces. Elizabeth, you're making good faces over there. I wish everybody had their video on. But so that gives us, good thought that, yeah, once it's in the freezer, it's going to survive or not, but it doesn't get freezer burn over time. Yeah, part of that mathematical equation to know that every egg does not equal a baby, right? So it's not like you're going to be, I've got 14 babies in the freezer now. That's extreme. You would be falling above the odds at every metric. So that would be extremely unlikely to happen. Also, because donor eggs have such a good chance of implanting, we really like to just transfer one at a time. Even transferring one, you do have a risk of twins. The risk of twins is about 1.5% to 2%, and that's from one embryo splitting. And so that's identical twins. And we really don't want to go put 2 embryos in, have a chance of twins that's over 40%. But what if one of those splits? Do you need triplets or quadruplets? And we all laugh about this, but those things happen. And we know we have colleagues who this has happened to. So they put 2 embryos on and there were quadruplets. And so a diabetic with quadruplets, our OB friends would murder us and we would no longer practice anymore. But our goal is live, healthy baby in your arms. And the best way we have to do that is by putting 1 embryo in at a time, especially if they're good quality embryos. The only reason to put more than 1 embryo inside is if we're worried about the genetic component, they're not all going to be normal, and we're trying to maximize the chance of pregnancy per transfer. But that is really a much older thought process, because now we're doing so much genetic testing, and probably Dr. Likes and I are both the same on this. We'd rather kind of know which embryo has the highest chance of success and put all of our good efforts behind that one and get the highest chance of pregnancy per single embryo transfer for every person, because that's really going to give you the highest chance of holding the baby in your arms, which is our real goal. And the other embryos are safest in the freezer. So that's changed as freezing techniques have gotten better. Genetic testing's gotten better, the culture process in the IVF lab. So all the fancy stuff that costs a lot of money that we really don't have anything to do with, that stuff has gotten so much better over time that it allows us to kind of flip the switch. So most of your multiples right now that are existing in current pregnancies are not from IVF. They're from Clomid or injectable hormones with IUIs. And so our IVF pregnancies are preferred. So even if you don't need IVF for other reasons, let's say you don't ovulate, you've got bad PCOS, and you come to me and you're a really bad diabetic, I'm gonna say, you know what? We may need to consider IVF so we can get the very lowest chance of multiples for you, because your pregnancy is gonna be high risk. So that mentality of IVF with twins and triplets is really diminishing, but it's not a guarantee. I definitely have patients who don't want twins, and you put one embryo in, and those are always the people who it splits on. I always look at each couple and say, how can I make you better? I may not be able to give you success. I wish we could have 100% success, but it doesn't exist in our field. That's one of the hardest things. So at some point, closing a door safely is another form, or going on to a different form of treatment. But ultimately, we don't want to make things worse. So, having a high order multiple pregnancy where the babies do not survive and we're 8 months down the road and you've just endured more heartbreak, that is absolutely opposite of where we want to be. So that's something that we're always thinking about, is how do we get you the highest chance of that happy baby coming back to take photos with us and not kind of into that despair state. I think what you're meaning is that there's a lot of things that go into egg quality. We really correlate it with genetics and then competency, and you can't evaluate an egg because an egg is a single cell full of water. And so to test it destroys it. You can test it when it gets to the embryo stage. And so that's why if you freeze your eggs, we can't tell you which ones are normal at the egg stage. You have to wait till they get fertilized with sperm and grow out and can be tested. When we have, for example, young couples who have a poor progression through culture, meaning they didn't make many blastocysts, or when you go and you test them and high percentage are genetically abnormal, like higher than we would expect for their age, then we know, or we are suspicious, there is an egg quality or a sperm quality or something going on where this is where IVF becomes an expensive diagnostic test. Now we've uncovered that the reason they weren't getting pregnant naturally is for whatever reason, when egg and sperm were coming together for them, we have a higher percentage of genetic abnormalities than we would expect. And it's harder to get to that normal embryo. This doesn't mean never, but it definitely changes the perspective when you're young and going through this. So that's hard. We learn a lot through IVF, but when we talk about really quality, the only way we can truly test it is with that end product of the genetics of the embryo. And then we correlate that with the quality of the eggs or the quality of the sperm. And women take most of the rap here because we do know that the eggs change as they get older, and the sperm doesn't do quite the same thing in most of the reproductive time span. It does degrade as men get older, but we're talking in a different age range. And so for men, they have to be usually 50 or above to see those changes. And so for women, though, it's after age 35. So we're in a very different world. For the majority of our patients, we are harping more on egg quality than sperm quality. Although I talk about sperm quality with my patients and what supplements and what kind of lifestyle factors they should be taking, because things you can take or do, well, you have to control what you can control in the journey, right? You got to take care of this box because you can't take care of all the other things out here. So if you say, well, we did what we could, we put our best eggs and sperm forward in that cycle, that's what you can do. And so I always try to control the things over here. I mean, truly, you can check these on any day of the cycle. I mean, if I had my perfect world and could have you in my office in any day, I love an early follicular antral follicle count. AMH hasn't really been shown to make a difference on cycle day. So we'll draw that at any time. And I do AFCs anytime just because it's not going to vary by a ton based on where you are in the cycle, but that's going to be the purest assessment. If you're at a clinic or if there's any indication that you need to check other reproductive labs. So before AMH existed, nobody talked about it. Everybody harped on FSH and E2, so estradiol, so FSH and estrogen. And checking those labs were very cycle specific. They usually had to be between days 2 to 4, if day 1 is the first day of full flow, to get an accurate assessment. And the higher your FSH was meant the harder your brain was working to get an egg to grow. Therefore, you had fewer eggs inside that vault because it took more to stimulate one of them to grow. And so using those things in conjunction, a normal FSH but a high estrogen meant that an egg was growing early, and that was kind of an in-between sign, like maybe you were on the downward curve. Those have fallen less out of favor because it's cumbersome to get somebody in on the right day, and it really does vary on the cycle. You could have one wonky cycle and be ovulating really early, and those things are off, which is less the case with AMH. So most clinics, I mean, maybe I'm overstepping. So I use AMH and then an antral follicle count, and I bring patients in on any cycle day to check them just when they're in the office. Back when we saw patients in the office pre-COVID, I do it at your new patient visit. I got you here. Let me get an ultrasound and let me get an AMH. And I'm kind of getting the data while I have you, while it's easy and convenient. Now we see patients virtually. So I'm seeing patients like this, and then I'm bringing everybody in for what we call a next steps visit. So you come to the office just for your quick ultrasound and for your blood work, kind of filling in the gaps. But we just want to get you in and get that data. Certainly if there's something concerning, sometimes we can repeat values or check other days, but I don't check them on a certain cycle data. Is there a minimum number of follicles resulting from IVF that you would recommend canceling or redo retrieval, whatever? It's totally dependent on goals and what expectations we've set, how many cycles we're okay doing. A good example is I have a young woman right now with really bad DOR, and we're not going to get more than 4 eggs. And we know it. We set our lower limit of threshold at 2, meaning if it's just 1, it's not worth it, but our range is 2 to 4. And we know we're looking at lots of cycles, but her husband doesn't have a lot of sperm. And so we're on board with this plan. Every 2 is better than 0. Now for a woman who has an antral follicle count of 20, settling for 2 would make absolutely no sense. And so there usually are kind of lower limits where we consider canceling. You know, the studies usually say you want to have 3 to proceed on with egg retrieval in the average patient, of at least having a chance of having one of them make it through to blastocyst. I think that, that's changing. We're doing genetic testing. So I think that's a really honest talk, and kind of depends. For the most part, if you have normal ovarian reserve, it's more rare to have your cycle canceled for poor response, because we do a pretty good job of gauging the right cycle type for you and how much medication you need to get those eggs to grow. But it happens. So sometimes you see a dominant follicle, just one is stealing all the drugs, and then we cancel out that. But if you have low reserve, canceling your cycle is a real possibility, and you need to understand, what does that mean? We always want to cancel it before you get to the pricey point, which is the egg retrieval and the lab stuff. And so sometimes that's what we're gauging. Do we think this is the best you can do, or do we think you can do better? And if we think it's the best or average for you, we should proceed. But if we do think you can do better, we usually want to try to do that. But usually all of us for each cycle have a number in mind that we're looking for that exact patient. And so understanding what that is, I tell my patients, we want this number or we're not going to proceed forward, because I think that draws the line really clear and they know what I'm thinking. And then if we're under it, we're under it. So we're not taken by surprise. But not everybody practices that way. So I think knowing what your doctor kind of wants for you, especially, I'm in a 2-doctor practice. So that's really different. We talk all the time. If you're in a practice with 6 doctors and they all share monitoring, it may be harder to get an assessment. So you may want to know what your benchmarks are as you go along the cycle from your own doctor who knows you the best. And there's a question over here about, do we recommend PGT for all patients? No, I think it really does depend on your goals, your age, how many kids you want. And so that's where that really plays into a role. Something that Dr. Likes and I both do, I'm just making presumptions here, is that for patients who want more than one child, who we might consider what we call embryo banking, which is we are saving embryos in the bank for the future, purposely not using them now. And when we do that, it is much to your advantage to know if they are normal or not. And I use an example of one of my good friends who came to me, and she was 32 when she went through her IVF cycle, and she had 8 embryos sent off for biopsy. So that sounds like a great number, right? Like, to add insult to injury, she's like a lesbian couple, sperm is great, awesome. One of them comes back normal. So we hem and haw about, should we do genetic testing or not? And one of them came back normal. It was embryo 7 on the list. Okay. So it would have taken us forever to get to it. But also they had the choice to say, do we want to go get more and save them, because it's going to be harder to find the normal ones later before we go transfer that one? Or are we going to change our plan, which is also an option too, to say, okay, now, hey, we know we may not be guaranteed that second kid. It may be really harder to get that in a couple of years, or we may have to go other ways. And they actually transfer the embryo. They have a beautiful girl, and they have decided they're a one-child family. And they've always said they were so thankful for that knowledge, because if they were walking around, either they would have been really frustrated by a lot of failed transfers, or thinking that they had 7 embryos in the bank that were normal. Like, that would put them in a totally different mindset than knowing that. So if those embryos, if our purpose of them is to give us children later, which admittedly is the bulk of my population, most of the people who come to see me have waited to start their family and are having a hard time getting started. And so we're not just talking about baby 1, we're often talking about baby 1, 2, maybe 3. Then doing genetic testing so that we know what those embryos are in the bank is going to help us know, have we achieved our goal or have the best chance of our goal from one cycle, or do we need to do another cycle? And so I think with that mentality of the future family, plus a little bit of an older patient population, I do a ton of genetic testing. Now, not for everybody. I have 24-year-olds with tubal factor, and we don't do it, and we even do InvoCell, which is a minimally, I don't know, do you do InvoCell, Dr. Likes?
We don't.
I have one. Okay, InvoCell, not the topic here, but is this little, you like how I have it? I'm in my home, and I have one in my home to show off. Okay, it's this little device, and it is a minimal stimulation that is not going to get as many eggs. So you're kind of looking to get 10 eggs because that's what fits in the device. And so you're compromising long-term goal by choosing this. But if there's no male factors and somebody's got good egg quality, you can put the sperm in this little doodad, and you put the eggs in here, and you put them together, and you shove this up in somebody's vagina with a diaphragm for 5 days. And the vagina is the perfect pH and temperature to incubate an embryo. Who knew? And then you pull it out, and you can just transfer an untested embryo. So I do this in some of my younger patients who maybe cost is a barrier to being able to achieve that full goal, or they're okay, not thinking about maybe they don't need 30 eggs to kind of get to their child that they need. And so not always genetic testing, but I will say the field is getting more and more there, because it is a straighter line to a baby for the vast majority of patients. And the straighter the line means there's less. You have 4 resources. You have time, what you can take emotionally, what you can take physically, and your money. And the straighter the line means we got to get you to that baby before any of these is gone. If you're emotionally worn out with the process, it doesn't matter if you have all the money in the bank, you're not going to keep going. Same thing, if you physically can't give yourself any more shots, it doesn't matter if I tell you your next cycle is going to get it for you. You won't do it. So we have to look at the whole picture here, and the straightest line to a baby for almost all patients, and not almost all, but the vast majority is genetic testing, because we know which embryo to put in has a much higher chance of success when we transfer that embryo. And there's added bonuses of, having some in the freezer, knowing if they're going to be good or not, knowing which ones. So higher pregnancy rate per transfer by genetic testing.
Well, and I will just chime in and say that we did our last month, we talked about genetic testing and PGT and PGA and what it all means. So
go listen. We have different tools in our tool belt, and it's not like we just look at everybody. We're like, IVF genetic testing, IVF genetic testing. We really evaluate, who are you? Where are your goals? What do you want? What's your age? What are your ovaries telling us about you? And what's the best way for us to give you what you're trying to get by coming to see us, which is the family of your dreams. And that's going to look different for absolutely every person who steps into your office. And if you're not at a place that you're asking these questions and you're not getting answers, or you're somewhere where you don't feel like you have the ability to ask questions, which I hear often, then you're not at the right place for you, because you deserve to be somewhere where somebody is answering these questions for you. And similarly, you need to know what to ask. But those are things for you to think about and to make sure that you have set your expectations appropriately. But having good communication with your fertility doctor, that's really important. Understanding that they know what you want, because if you have your goals over here, but you never talk about it, it's going to be really hard for us over here to read your mind and know what they are and help you achieve them. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be totally transparent about them, because I promise we're not going to judge you. We don't care. If you want 10 kids, all girls, that's awesome. Let's do it. What do we need to do to make that happen? It's going to look very different than I want 1 baby.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my.
I say all the time, this field is probably one of the highest in individualized treatment or individualized medicine that you can get. And so I think we're speaking the same thing here in terms of doing the evaluation and setting up the protocol and plan.
Hey guys, I think you guys have asked tons of good questions.
Yeah, and that's
Thank
a
you.
really good last compliment to you from Nicole.
That means a lot. Thank you, Nicole.
It all worked out. That's awesome.
Well, thank you guys, everybody.
Yeah.
I will just say that, as Kristin said, I've got a podcast called As a Woman and a YouTube channel that's Natalie Crawford MD, and that's where I am on all the social places. So Instagram is Natalie Crawford MD, and so is TikTok. It's really cringy there, but people are there, so I'm there anyway. Embarrassingly. And I'm always happy, I'm sure Dr. likes this too. I think one of the hardest things is finding that right fertility doctor. If you're looking for somebody in your area and you don't have somebody to see, you can always, reach out in DMs or an email and be like, hey, I live in Georgia. Do you have any recommendations here? Because it's a really small field and we know lots of people. So if you're not getting what you need and you want any recommendations, feel free to ask. We can't give personalized medical advice to people who are not our patients. And so keep that in mind. And if you're in Texas, I'm at Fora Fertility here in Austin and would love to see you.
Well, and also, in this day and age of telehealth, I see patients in Georgia. I see patients in, neighboring states. So consider that as well if you're close to Dr. Crawford or me, whatever. So Thank you all so much. Dr. Crawford, thank you so much too. Appreciate it.
I will just add on to that. I traveled for my doctor too. So I think that it's okay if you travel to go. It's all about going to the best, not about the closest.
Agree with that.
Yeah.
or the cheapest. Sorry, I'm like need to be getting off, but instead I'm like, right? Places are the cheapest for a reason. Like, anyways, go to somebody who fits you because you pay for quality. And it's not just about the doctor getting all the money. It's often the fancy stuff that they do in the lab that makes the biggest difference.
Okay. Well, thanks guys. If you have further questions related to her talk, don't be shy about reaching out to her. It sounds like she clearly cares about sharing the information, and I really appreciate that. So if anybody is a patient of hers, you're definitely in good hands. And it's really nice also to hear that Dr. Likes and her speak the same talk. So that's also reassuring, just to know that you're hearing the same information.
It was kind of uncanny, quite honestly, I'll admit.
Well, especially without being like going through the same practice, or doing fellowship together or something like that. Like I could see that happening. But it means that the information that's out there is, being passed around. So what I'm going to talk about now from my aspect, the emotional side of infertility. So again, we always pair the medical side and the emotional side together. I was going to talk about expectations, and it was really interesting because she spoke a lot about expectations with every step of the way and what your doctor's telling you. And I was really going to focus on expectations related to milestones in life and not specifically related to, like IVF and your treatment or results at every step of the way, but it is still applicable. So I hope you enjoy what she said, and I hope that this is applicable to you too and relatable, because I think really no matter what we're going through, we all have expectations in life. And so, yes, I'm glad you're here. But what I've learned about expectations is, again, with milestones, is that they're kind of just made up. They're things that we come up with ourselves. They come out of nowhere. They're not really based on anything. They tend to come from our upbringing or our social surroundings. Because when I was raised, I thought I had the expectation that I would play a sport in high school. I would go to college. I'd graduate in 4 years. I'd move to New York City, get a job, fall in love, get married after 2 years of dating, have 2 babies 2 years apart, and live happily ever after. And for those of you that know my story, you know that that's not necessarily how it actually all turned out and happened. And sometimes expectations can help us. They motivate us. They help us dream and encourage us. They make us, they inspire us. But they can also sometimes hurt too. I don't know if this has happened to you before, but have you ever been told from all of your friends to like go see a movie that it was like the best movie they've ever seen? And it's like, get outside, go to that movie right now. Clearly not in COVID, because theaters I think are closed. But before then, where they say, this is the best movie, it's going to win all the awards. Or this is the best movie that so-and-so is in. I've never seen such good acting. And then by the time you finally get to see the movie, you're a little disappointed. I had that happen to me with, what's the name of the movie? A Star is Born? A Star is Born. I know everybody loved it, but I went with such high expectations for that movie. I saw it after everybody else. I was a little disappointed. It landed flat for me. That does not change that fact that that movie did win an award, did it? But my expectations were not really realistic and set based on that. So sometimes expectations make us disappointed. They might make us feel sort of deflated or rejected because we haven't hit a milestone in our life. And I just want to tell you that I don't blame you if you have milestone expectations, like the thinking you'll be married and have kids by 30 or 32. I mean, that is part of what society tells us and thinks. I mean, also for some people, it's being married to have a kid. That's not necessarily the case all the time. And that's not necessarily everybody's reality. So I just want to let you know that it's okay if you've had expectations. Please don't feel like that. But expectations are a little bit also like norms and averages. And to get to that line, there are people above it and there are people below it. And that in our case with fertility and age-related milestone things, there are people where they get to those things faster. There are people who graduate college in faster than 4 years. There are people who graduate in college in 6 years or 7 years. But at the end of the day, they still graduated, right? So whether it took longer, it didn't necessarily take away the victory of completion. So I just wanted you to know that an expectation can be good and can be okay, especially with milestones and life, but sometimes they can hurt you. And if you're like me, I hit a lot of milestones in life as expected. I felt like I don't know, I kind of had a cushy, easy life. I was doing well. You know, it starts as early, we learn about this in school with walking and talking, with reading. We're also, though, sort of conditioned to learn that if we fall away from the norm, if we don't learn to read as fast as everybody else, we might have to stay back in school. We might have to get extra attention. We might need to stay after school and get a tutor. And so it was a little bit of a survival metric or tactic to stay with the crowd and the group to fit in with the norm. We don't necessarily need it in the sake of keeping ourselves alive anymore, but it still is that social expectation and pressure to stay with your friend group. But as we get older, those expectations and those milestones, they sort of spread out. So again, when we were younger and we learned to walk and talk and do things as toddlers and kids, it's really in a small, finite period of time. But when we talk about things later in life, like I said, even college or getting promoted or getting married, that can happen in different spans of time. But when our expectation is set to say that we will become VP of our company by the time we're 30, that might not be realistic for your career field, your company, or just the situation you're in because of things like COVID or recessions or 9/11. Those were outside things that impacted your succession. So just know that sometimes expectations might not help you so well. If you're here, I'm guessing you've probably had some milestone expectations that you've had to readjust related to being a mom. You probably, like me, thought that making a baby happens privately in your home between you and your partner. And then you probably had to readjust, right? You guys wrote, some of you have AMH numbers that are low. Some of you struggled. I know from some of you who've been here before, you've gone through multiple rounds and multiple cycles. You've tried lots of things. You've already had to readjust your expectations. So I promise you, I am not here trying to tell you to like lower the bar, to stop going after what you want at all. That is not what I'm trying to say here. But what I am here to tell you is what you can do related to expectations to kind of set yourself up more for success, or to not let them be something that you beat yourself up about. Some of the times we're afraid of them because we're afraid of not meeting expectation because it might be a way to validate us and how we stand up to the norm. And that's not necessarily the case. We're also afraid of, I don't know, being late or not meeting the expectation and failing. And it's not necessarily such a hot and cold, all or nothing mentality. I'll give you an example. I lived in New York City and I watched the New York City Marathon every year, partly also because my dad was a marathon runner. So I grew up thinking about marathons. And then one year I decided I was gonna volunteer at the finish line. And I was able to be the person who wrapped all the athletes up at the end of the finish line after 26.2 miles. I wrapped them in the tinfoil to keep them warm after the race. And then the next year I decided I wanted to run it. And so I submitted my name because it's a lottery system. So I put in my name because I wanted to run the New York City Marathon and I didn't get it. Because there's 40,000 people who run it and there's 3 times as many people who do it. But then I volunteered or signed up to do one of the fundraisers where I had to raise a certain amount of money. And if I did, then I would get a spot. I would sort of buy my way in. So I had to adjust my expectation again and again. And then my expectation was that I was going to run that marathon in 5 hours. Yes, 5 hours. Some people, that's amazing. Some people, that's horribly bad. It doesn't matter. For me, that was my goal. And I did it in 5 hours and 17 minutes. But let me tell you, when I crossed that finish line and when I got wrapped in that blanket, and when my father afterwards said, welcome to a very elite group of people, that did not make that, me crossing that finish line and me getting to that place, it didn't make it any less wonderful because it didn't meet that expectation, just because it took a little bit longer. And so I just want you to remember what really matters, that sometimes our expectations can hurt. And sometimes they might deflate us and discourage us. But also sometimes when things don't go as planned or they take a little bit longer, they can actually turn out better too. Those 17 minutes didn't really matter because I still did the damn marathon. And I'll never do one again. But I did it. But I've been unmarried. I went through IVF 3 times. I had to do all of the things. I adjusted expectations time and time again. I watched my friends meet every milestone around me and feel like I was falling behind. So if you feel like that, you're not alone. I've been there. I felt that way. But there are people around you who look at you and who wish and want for what you have and seen some of the things you've had come easy. Just not everything. Some things are going to be a little bit harder and might take readjusting expectations. My daughter, who is an IVF miracle, was literally worth the wait and was worth all of the expectation changes. And if you are in a position right now where you're still waiting, I really honestly believe that it will be better. If you're not where you want to be, I promise you it will be better when you get there. What do you do if you're noticing that like you have all these expectations and life milestones, you're not kind of really getting to them? I would want you to ask yourself a couple questions. I'm a big believer in journaling. So if you've been here before, you've heard me talk about it, or if you're in my Facebook group, all my clients, this is one of the first things we do, but journaling really helps. But ask yourself these questions. Does the expectation really matter to you? So one example is, yeah, I wanted to be a mom for sure. I've been saying that since I was little. I have a video of me at 7, like putting a balloon in my belly saying, look at me, I'm pregnant. Then I had to wait 30 years and get pregnant at 37. But being a mom mattered more than being a mom by 32, or being a mom by 35, or being a mom by 36. Being a mom is what mattered. So does the expectation really matter? And are there ways to twist it a little bit differently? Does it help you or does it hurt you? Does thinking that how you will become a mom really matter? Does thinking that the only way for you to become a mother is to do it naturally and to not have any assisted reproductive help, does that hurt you when you go and you have a doctor's appointment, they tell you that you're going to need to do IVF or InvoCell or whatever it is, or genetic testing? Does that really matter? Does that hurt you thinking that you put this arbitrary expectation on your life's to-do list? Because if you adjust it to just say that being a mom matters more than how you become a mom, it will really change your outlook. You can also ask yourself, what do I have control over? I love how Dr. Crawford was talking about, you can't really change the quality of your eggs, but you can do things in your lifestyle to help with the proteins around them. This or proteins, I love the visual. But you can do things and eliminate toxins and eat good foods that are good for your body, and take some vitamins. There are things that you can do. So what is in your control? When you think about expectation, you just say, I'm going to be a millionaire and I'm going to have 4 kids by 32. What's in your control? What can you do today that's going to help you get closer? And it's okay to adjust expectations. It's okay to get rid of them. Or, you can keep doing what you're doing. You can keep thinking that it's going to be the way it's been. And yep, you keep missing all these expectations. And life's going to be pretty shitty and pretty hard. And So I just want you to know that you're not being left behind, because even though I've joined the mom club at 37 and I might be one of the oldest moms in my neighborhood, I still am an awesome mom, and it doesn't take away from that. And I made it in to the mom club. It doesn't matter how old I am. You're not being left behind. There are other people who have watched what you've done and seen it come easy, and they're probably watching you going, I wish I could have had that. Whether that was professionally or personally, financially, it doesn't matter. Also, from point A to point B is not always straight, and it's not always only one line. You know, how many different ways can we go from South Carolina to Texas? I mean, it's an unimaginable amount. And that's one of the things that I do as a coach, is I help people have the perspective to realize that there are different ways, there are lots of options out there. So keep in mind that expectations can be adjusted, they can be tweaked, they can be taken away. And most of the time they help, because they motivate you, they inspire you, they have you dream towards bigger and more. And I'm a life coach. I love that. I want that. Go for your dreams. But don't make it and think about it so narrow-mindedly, because that's when you put yourself into sort of this bucket where it's going to make it a lot harder. So I hope that I can be proof for you that if you're late to the party, guess what? You still enjoy the party. And that if your expectations are not met, I honestly believe they will be better than what you had in mind. Because that is exactly the life that I feel like I'm living right now. And I want to inspire you to go after that too. So that being said, you're not missing out. You're not alone. I'm here. There's other women here who totally understand that feeling and get it. And it's okay if you show up late to the party, as long as you make it. So that's what I wanted to cover for tonight related to expectations. And I just want to thank everybody who's here. If you like what you heard going on from Dr. Crawford and myself, please join us for next month. You're on the list. You will be notified. I hope you can make it. Also, what Dr. Crawford talked about is one of those things I wish I heard about 10 years ago. I really encourage you to help spread her message and the news to other friends in your life so that they can benefit from this. I have a Facebook group. I would love to invite you to join the Facebook group. I do trainings like this more frequently than once a month, so I'd love to have you come and join. I will include a link in the email. Thank you.
Thank y'all so much.
All right. Bye, guys. Thanks so much for having me.